Well, hi there. Warm welcome. You're watching Blueprint Explosive Exclusive with me, Meghan Deka. Well, after the mayhem which was unleashed by the Khalistani mob in London today, the Indian diaspora in the United Kingdom gave a befitting reply to the nefarious agenda. Hundreds of Indians living in Britain, remember, gathered at the Indian High Commission in London and waved the tricolour with pride. The entire vicinity echoed with chants of Bharat Mata Ki Jai. This message was loud and clear. Thus far, and no further.
It was like, this is how Indians are. We know you are change any adverse situation to a celebration. हमारे सिख भाइयों के साथ कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं है. ये जो खालिस्तानी माइंडसेट रखे हुए हैं, जो चाहते हैं भारत को तोड़ना, भारत के लिए मुश्किल खड़ा करना, आके यूके में आपको प्रॉब्लम है, आप भारत में उसको सॉर्ट आउट करिए, ना कि आप आके किसी फॉरेन कंट्री में और हमारे हाई कमीशन को अटैक करना. इट इज एज गुड एज यू आर अटैकिंग आवर सॉवरेनिटी ऑफ इंडिया. ये कभी होने नहीं देंगे. और आप देखिए पूरी कम्युनिटी, कम से कम 500 लोग इकट्ठा हुए हैं. हम पीसफुली तरीके से बताना चाह रहे हैं दुनिया को कि हम कहीं किसी के लिए प्रॉब्लम नहीं करते, और हम इन खालिस्तानी भाइयों को बोलेंगे कि अपना दिमाग को बदले और भारत को जो प्रॉब्लम है भारत के साथ बैठ के बात करके इसको सुलझाए. ये नहीं कि लड़ाई झगड़े से कभी कोई चीज का प्रॉब्लम नहीं हो सकता. जय हिंद, जय भारत.
Well, unfortunately, this Khalistani revival bid is seen not just in the UK but also across in Canada. Khalistani supporters and sympathizers continue to run riot in the West. In a latest one coming in, an Indian origin journalist, Sameer Kaushal, was heckled by the Khalistani mob in Canada, Surrey. He's joining us live. He's going to tell us how he deliberately felt he was being targeted by the pro-Khalistani protesters. Even the police remained mute spectators to this whole affair, even as the entire protest turned violent. Instead of stopping the violent mob, the police instead escorted him away. He can be seen there in the visuals being pulled away, pushed away by the police instead of trying to clamp down on the Khalistani supporters. They instead felt it better to push him away from the space.
Person who was addressing the supporters, his supporters over there, he just start using the abusive language, derogatory words, and deliberately approximately more than 24 youngsters, those who have covered their faces with the clothes, they just circling around me, and they just swarmed on me and throwing abusive language. And before me, there was another guy. The guy has been beaten up by the crowd over there, by the mob over there. And I don't think they have done anything after that. I saw in some media reports that RCMP, they opened the investigation, but no arrest has been made yet. No charges have been laid yet. So still, if the investigation is on, what they are waiting for, police was, the Surrey RCMP was acting as a mute spectator with the silent approval to the protesters to do whatever they want to do.
Well, from the UK to the US to Australia, the Khalistani Brigade has gone on a rampage. Various of these violent protests have been held across countries that are said to be safe havens for Khalistani supporters. Today, Khalistani sympathizers held a protest in support of Amritpal in New Zealand's Auckland as well. In fact, India, without mincing any words, has told the UK and the US that such behavior by Khalistani mob that hurts safety and security of India and dents India's sentiments were completely unacceptable. In fact, India has demanded strict action against those involved in these incidents. Both US and UK have condemned such incidents and vowed strict action. The National Security Advisor to the White House has expressed anguish over the attack and promised a crackdown against the radical that have perpetrated the crime. So let me go across. Joining us today on the show will be one of the UK MPs as well. But before I come to you, Mr. Bob Blackman, let's get you some of the reactions which have been coming in as well.
That vandalism, it's just absolutely unacceptable. The State Department's Diplomatic Security Service is working with local authorities. I can't speak for the San Francisco police, but I can say that the Diplomatic Security Service is working with local authorities to properly investigate, and obviously the State Department is going to be working from an infrastructure perspective to repair the damage.
एक तो बात यह है कि ये जो सारा सिलसिला है अमृतपाल का, ये सब ISI के द्वारा प्रायोजित है। ये पाकिस्तान की खुफिया एजेंसी है ISI, वही इस योजना को आज से नहीं कुछ दशकों से चला रहा है और इसके जो नेता सब हैं ये पाकिस्तान में ही रहते हैं।
Such kind of behavior should not be exposed in the domain of the diplomatic channels. There may be some, they may have some idea, but it should not be particularly use the Consulate General's office. So I would like to appeal all of them not to show such kind of behaviors.
In fact, let's go across to Bob Blackman, who's joining us live, a parliamentarian of UK, someone who's been at the forefront repeatedly. He has raised the issue of how Hindus and symbols of Hinduism and now even India has come under direct attack by secessionist forces. Thank you so much, Mr. Blackman, for speaking to us here again on Times Now. Not for the first time, of course, the Indian High Commission in the UK has been at the receiving end of vandalism on the part of Khalistani radicals. India, in fact, in its response, has summoned the British Deputy High Commissioner Christina Scott to the MEA as well. So has the UK been doing enough, you think, to keep these elements on a tight leash?
Well, I think the first thing is that we utterly condemn the vandalism and unwarranted attacks on the High Commission in London. And indeed, our thoughts are with the 2 security guards who were injured in trying to prevent the attack on the Commission. Obviously, I also salute the brave individuals in the Commission who, when there was an attack on the Indian flag, they chose to then fly an even bigger flag of India, which demonstrates that they will not be intimidated, and quite rightly too.
Absolutely.
There are questions to be answered because obviously. From the information I have at the moment, obviously one person was arrested at the scene, but others are being investigated, and the police are checking the CCTV and other means of identifying the people responsible. And obviously that it's an ongoing police investigation, and I hope that the perpetrators will be apprehended, that they'll be charged with offences and swiftly dealt with through the UK justice system. However, this is also a coordinated attack on Indian embassies around the world. So it's not just in London this happened, obviously in Australia, Canada, I think, and the USA. There are attacks on Indian embassies by this very small minority of Khalistanis. And I think what we've got to do is make sure that the security services are monitoring these activities and determining what they're up to and when they're up to it. There are questions to be answered by the police as to why there was no police presence and why, if they knew about the impending demonstration outside the Commission, why they didn't actually police it in the first place. And my understanding is the police arrived after the demonstration had turned ugly and the windows were broken and there was the attempt to break into the Commission. It shouldn't have been that way. I mean, in London and around the world, obviously embassies need to be protected from such activities. And there are still question marks. I don't know the answers to these yet, but I've been asking the questions because we can't have this happen again. As you say, this is not the first time that the Commission has been attacked by Khalistani separatists, and so therefore we know that these organisations exist.
Absolutely.
They are obviously coordinating their activities around the world.
Yes.
And we need to combat them.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, we are very shortly be joined also by Samir Kaushal. As you rightly said, it seems to be a coordinated attack, not just in the UK, but also across in Canada. One of the Indian origin journalists had to face the brunt of it. We'll go across to Samir in just a bit. But Mr. Blackman, what happened is a violation of the provisions of the Vienna Convention as well, where the host country has an obligation to protect the High Commission. Moreover, an explanation has also been sought for the complete absence absence of British security, something that you've also talked about. When this incident had happened, the police appeared on the scene after this had already happened. So do you acknowledge that there were indeed lapses when it came to policing, when it came to ensuring the safety of the consulate?
Yeah, I do. And I think, this is one of the key points here, that why was there no security and police in presence at the time? Obviously, this was a Sunday afternoon, but nevertheless, the reality is that the security forces should have known that this was happening. If they didn't know that it was happening, why didn't they know? And indeed, what action did they take when they found out this was happening? Because we can't allow a position whereby embassies, of whoever's embassies from around the world, are attacked in this way. This is just unacceptable on the streets of London. And I'm afraid the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, who is in charge of our police force in London, should apologise directly to the Indian High Commissioner in London, and indeed to the government in Delhi, because this is a very serious security lapse, and who knows, things could have been a lot worse if those individuals had got into the commission and fights had broken out within the building. So once again, as I say, we cannot have this position going on. I have communicated with our Home Secretary on this particular issue, and we will now be pursuing it through our internal mechanisms in Parliament.
Right.
To make sure that prompt action is taken and the people that are in charge account for why they allowed this to happen.
Absolutely. In that case, Mr. Blackman, India had also in 2021 had conveyed its concerns to the UK counterparts over the organisation of the Khalistani referendum by the secessionist elements in United Kingdom. In fact, the likes of Sikhs for Justice, which is of course banned in India, were also involved in that mobilisation. Now, there is a perception here that such elements have been given a free run and allowed to operate freely overseas, specifically in the UK. How would you respond to these concerns of India?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that peaceful demonstration, for whatever purpose, is reasonable, as long as it's not supporting a banned organisation. Now, what we do have to look at now is, and I've called for this, is to review urgently this organisation, provided we can both identify its leaders and its operations in the UK, and look to prescribe it as an organisation. That's a process that has to go through our security services. If it becomes a banned organisation, then it would then be illegal in the UK to join the organisation. It would also be illegal to demonstrate on the streets and indeed wave banners or take up the cause that they espouse. So from our perspective, it's now time that we look to that, because once a demonstration turns ugly in one time, that's bad enough. But this is, as you say, the second time in 2 years when this has happened, and it's just unacceptable.
Absolutely.
What I will also say is that this is a very, very small minority of Sikhs that are seeking to do this. And really, we need to make sure that people do not encounter, Sikhs in the UK, encounter prejudice simply because they are Sikh. I mean, we want to be very clear on this, that it's a very, very small minority, and there should not be an excuse for the Sikh population in the UK, which is vastly predominantly, a peace-loving group of people just wanting to get on with their lives. They should not be singled out for reparations or attacks by other communities, which is the risk at the moment.
And that's a very important distinction that you have made. It is not Sikhs as a community. It is a very small handful who are part of this secessionist revival movement, which seems to be happening in a coordinated track. In fact, Mr. Blackman, during the tenure of Boris Johnson as the Prime Minister, the UK had set up an anti-extremist task force as well. This was to monitor the activities of the pro-Khalistani elements. Now, this was in April last year. Boris Johnson had also said, I'm going to quote him here, he said, "We do not welcome some people who want to use our legal system to evade law in India. But has there been any progress on that front?
Well, that's a good question, and it's one that we will be asking. I mean, obviously, Boris took this when he was Prime Minister and went, obviously, to India last year, and indeed he was in Gujarat for the celebrations there. And indeed, he took action to counter this separatist threat. And obviously, we will be looking at what needs to be done now. In addition, it's quite reasonable to ask what progress has been made on monitoring these activities in the United Kingdom and across the world, because we need to act in concert with our allies.
Absolutely.
To make sure that this secessionist group are singled out and called out and prevented from causing the disruption that they are doing to embassies, as I say, not just in the UK, but across the world.
Absolutely. And we really appreciate Mr. Bob Blackman. You're, of course, very busy, but thank you so much for taking time out to speak to Times Now. You've been at the forefront of highlighting that something needs to be done and needs to be done immediately, that the action that has been taken so far has not been adequate enough when it comes to crushing anti-India sentiments in the United Kingdom. Thank you again for joining us. With that, a short break here on Times Now.